Change is imminent. Transformation is inevitable. Whether you're talking about a butterfly that comes from a larva, then a caterpillar worm-looking thing, and then goes into its cocoon and binds itself up into a chemical process that leaves zero mark, nothing left of the caterpillar. He does it by choice. He does. I mean, the caterpillar could choose to continue to crawl around on the ground until it either dies or gets squashed or eaten by a bird. But the caterpillar that chooses to climb up the tree and spin a cocoon chooses utter destruction. It chooses to wrap itself up in a cocoon and to be transformed. Many people don't understand that transformation is inevitable. It's simply not possible to stay the same, unchanged, forever. We can't. Our bodies age and grow older. Our minds absorb information. It's what we do with that information that we gather as to whether or not it becomes something valuable. Now, those of you who've been paying attention to this broadcast for any period of time know that a couple of years ago, I had an opportunity to travel to the Congo. One of the observations I made while I was in the Congo was how normal it is for people to open the plastic wrapper with their knife and fork and napkin in it and simply throw the wrapper on the ground right wherever they're at. And it didn't matter if they were at a fancy hotel or walking down the street. Wherever they were, when they finished with that item, that article, they would simply drop it on the ground. And I was fascinated by the fact that even when spending the day training the highest level, highest educated, most influential, highest income group of people in all of the Congo, the political leaders of the parliament, the behavior didn't change. You would think that people who had access to greater wealth, greater knowledge, greater information, greater influence would have a different behavior in regard to the garbage, but they didn't. It struck me as a little bit different. But when I noticed that the whole of their society carried that natural reaction to garbage as a cultural stigma, if you will, it really struck me when we got on the plane leaving the Congo and from DRC to Belgium, you could see seats where every piece of garbage, the wrapper from the coffee paper, the stir straw after the coffee had been stirred, it went on the floor. The plastic cellophane that comes off the top of the packaged meal was on the floor, stuck in the carpet. The fork, the knife, even sometimes the package itself on the floor under the seat rather than in a garbage bag. And I don't mean one or two random seats. I mean hundreds of seats. No exaggeration. It was amazing. When we landed in Belgium, a certain number of the Congolese citizens, I guess, moved on to flights from Belgium into New York, the same flight that I was on. And when we landed in New York, there were a smattering of seats, but they were very specific. And if you watched closely, you could see that the people in the Congolese garb, in the patterns and the colors and the fabrics of their nation, were in the seats where the trash was left behind. And then from New York to Dallas, the same was true. It was a fascinating study to me to see that, generationally speaking, it didn't matter their age. It didn't matter if they looked as if they were traveling on their last dime or this was a vacation trip for them. Those things weren't relevant. It was their nation of origin that seemed to be the strongest indicator as to whether they left garbage behind or they took it with them or put it in the waste bag. It's a fascinating observation, in my opinion. Well, last night, let me add one more feature to that. So that was when I was there in 2016. In 2017, I was back in the Congo again, and I spoke both in the capital city of Kinshasa and in another major city named Kisangani. And I also had a chance to speak at the University of Kinshasa, where there are about 15,000 students. I only spoke to 300 or 400 of their doctoral students. I brought up that story about how people would just open their trash and drop it on the floor. And I noticed the same thing on the airplane. And a couple of my colleagues caught on to that. And they're like, you're right. I noticed the same thing. I hadn't really thought about it until you said something about it. But we had conversations about it. Last night, I had a chance to sit down at the American Classic Buffalo Wild Wings with two professors from the Congo, one who served as our interpreter and one who is both a dean of students and teaches poli-sci at the University of Kinshasa, but also serves in the parliament as a senator in the Congo. And I brought up that story again and talked about what I had witnessed on the plane because of all the illustrations that I use when I talk about the attitude hack and learn to word leadership and all of this stuff. And the senator has, I believe he still watches this program, even though his son has to translate it for him. He has a plethora, close to 40 gigabytes of the training that I've done in audio, video, PDF file, PowerPoint presentations that he has adopted and uses in the classes he teaches in the University of Kinshasa. And so we started talking about some of that material on how it fit, and he said, what would really be precious for me is some of your Western illustrations don't translate well, not only into French, but into Congolese culture. It would be awesome if some of the things that you teach fit our cultural idioms and axioms even better. And I said that it absolutely would. Unfortunately, my total accumulated time there is about 10 days. And so it's really hard for me to culturally assimilate and then to plant into my teachings all of those cultural assimilations. Maybe over time, 10 days at a time, I can really get better insight and be able to do that. But I only have a few illustrations right now that actually come from the Congo. And the first one is with regard to how they handle their waste. And when I brought that up through the translator, we were having the conversation back and forth. And when I finished, he said, you might be proud to know that after the last time you were there when you spoke at the university, it became a big deal. And the university did two things. They created a line item in their budget to purchase trash cans and encourage all the students on campus to pick up their trash and put it in the trash can rather than leaving it where they are. That's a powerful, powerful transition. If the college students, the best, the brightest hope for the future of the Congo, begin to adopt a new way of seeing things, that their perspective on how garbage is handled in the public changes, if their way of life changes with regard to that, it will only take a couple of generations before the idea of littering will be thought of as a negative connotation. Well, how do we know that? Because we've seen it in America. We've seen it in America. Look at smoking just as an example. People around me smoked all of my life. Now there are maybe half a dozen people that I know personally who vape, but the stigma associated with smoking has brought the level of people who smoke down so far, and the taxation on cigarettes has gone up so high. I remember being able to run into the store when I was a kid and buy cigarettes for my parents or aunts and uncles, and they were 75 cents, $1 a pack. Now they're close to $5 a pack. I mean, you could take your family to Four Seasons for dinner for a couple of cartons a month. It's a pretty big deal. But the way that we perceive cigarette smoking has flipped. It's been inverted. And I believe that transformation is inevitable in certain social circumstances. The way that people of various genders are treated, the way that people are perceived to have gender identity differing from their body, people who have different sexuality preferences. And not too many years past, and simply in my high school and university days, the stigma was strong. The derision, the hostility, the violence was rampant. If your identity or your sexual behavior didn't line up with what everyone thought it should, you faced a lot of pressure to change. That's been transformed. That's been flipped on its head. That's a completely different thing now. In fact, as I talked to high school students just last week, one of the questions I asked them is, when we talk about diversity, now the school that I mentor in happens to be, according to their own data, the fourth most diverse school in the world. They have more different nationalities and styles and cultures and religions of people than any other public school that I'm aware of. That's pretty powerful. It's really hard to teach them anything new on diversity when you just look across the crowd and you have African and Sudanese and French and other Europeans and Americans and African American. I mean, they're all over just in a classroom of 20. It's fascinating. But because they become so culturally assimilated, and the nature of their school is that everybody fits in. We just let everyone fit in. You know what the biggest stigma is? The thing that you could say or do that would make you the biggest outcast? It's to be a bully. It's to be a bully. What no one wants to be labeled as is a bully. If you're dogmatic, if you're hard-headed, if you're stuck in your cultural ways, you're a bully. And if you're a bully, you will be treated worse by the entire population of the school than if you set your hair on fire. It's a fascinating, fascinating reality. So last night with the senator, we had a chance to talk about political systems. Now, I've had the chance in recent years to travel to Brazil and to Cuba and to the Congo and through Belgium. And in recent past, I've been in Honduras and England as well. And I've seen and interacted with and engaged with their culture and their society and their ways of doing things. He's been to China and all over Asia. And as we compared notes about political systems and the way that things work and the cultural appropriations and how all of that kind of swirls together, one of the observations was that really there's a central theme to places where there are challenges. I brought up the idea of a news story I saw yesterday. In fact, I shared it on my Facebook page. It came from Vice News, which I have to be honest and say, I've never vetted Vice News. I don't know anything about Vice News. I don't know who they are, where they're from, what their origins are, what their political slant is. I don't know any of that stuff. I just know that the story talked about two cultural clashes in the northeast area, far northeast of the Congo. In fact, about 2,000 miles in the same country, about 2,000 miles from Kinshasa, where I go. And so I sent that out on Facebook, and then I asked the senator about it. I said, is this something I should be concerned about if we're planning a trip back there this year? And he said, I have to be honest and tell you, it's been about 50 years since that clash started. And for the last 45 years, no one has cared. It's a local argument. And the argument is really simple. And I'm going to reduce this to the ridiculous. There was a cartoon many years ago with Foghorn Leghorn and that big goofy looking dog. And in this particular cartoon, the dog was a sheep herder. And the dog would bring his sheep over the hill into the cornfields where the farmer and the chickens were doing their farming thing. And you would literally see them like strip mines, just, and they would make the sound like a wood chipper. They would come over the hill, and you would see where there used to be beautiful fields of corn, and just the sheep would eat it all like termites, and there'd be nothing left, just dirt and dust, just and it's all gone. The story behind the story of the Vice News and the eradication of and the genocide of a certain people group, it really goes back to the fact that one group of those people are farmers. They raise corn. They raise corn, they eat corn, they sell corn. That's their livelihood. The more acreage you have, the more corn you can grow, the more you can eat, the more you can sell, the better you live. That's not complicated math. The other group of people are cattle herders. You know what cattle like to eat? You got it. Corn and grass and anything else that's on the ground. They just want to eat it all. And so as the herds of cattle have grown and grown and grown, the migrants who raise cattle are more like nomads. They literally move their herds to wherever there's something to eat. And because there's not a whole lot of property ownership rights in the Congo unless the government owns it, nothing stops them. So if they see this beautiful green field off in the distance and their cows are hungry, they're going to eat it. And that causes a fight. And it has caused fights for 50 to 100 years. But now, because there's this word called genocide that makes headlines, that grabs people's attention, that makes people greatly concerned about the plight of whomever, this clash between these two groups of people, the corn growers and the cattle growers, has made international news. That's the way the senator puts it to me. I said, well, is it a threat? Is it a problem? He said, only if you're a cow or if you're corn. He said, yeah, there's violence happening, and there are people getting driven off their land because there's no place left to grow the corn, or there's no corn left to have. But honestly, if the cows migrate through and they eat their fill and they move on to the next place, grow it behind them. It's a practical solution. He said, but the reality is the cows are outnumbering the people in some places. And as a result, there's no place left to grow it. And so they move to a place where there's fewer cows, more people, and more opportunity to grow their maize. And that's the way it's worked for decades. He said it will be probably in the next 5 to 10 years, it will be a problem in the major city areas because in some of those areas, the amount of cattle are encroaching on the city, and nobody can explain why. Nobody can explain why they've moved 2,000 miles from the northeast down to the capital city of Kinshasa. But the cows are coming, and as the cows are coming, they're eating everything. And that's a big deal. Okay, transformation is inevitable. The transformation of a society. Very few people today, unless you're a Quaker or a Puritan or is it the Puritans? Oh my goodness, I know there are Quakers and there are Mennonites. I think it's the Quakers that are still in northwest Pennsylvania and parts of Iowa and Indiana, and they use horse and buggy still. Of course, if you're in Cuba, you could see a Mercedes and a horse and buggy in the same street on the same day, going the same direction, right behind each other. I have video to prove it. But for most part, we've moved away from horse and buggy in America. Most people have cars. Even if they're farmers, they have pickup trucks and tractors. They don't use as many mules and donkeys and horses and oxen to move things around. Transformation is inevitable. What are you doing to either aid in transformation? Planting the idea that maybe it's wrong to litter. More young people today think it's morally wrong to litter than to use pornography. That's a viewpoint of the American public. It's not a viewpoint of the Congolese public. But if it became that, would there still be piles of garbage waist deep in various places across the city of Kinshasa, waiting to be piled up by bulldozers and burned? Would that be the norm? Or would litter be a thing of the past? Almost every state in the United States has signs that say do not litter. There are signs in certain states that say report if you see littering. And it's up to a $500 fine for a cigarette butt. That's a pretty drastic penalization. Yes, I understand part of that is simply a way for the government to make money, because they know some people are going to litter no matter what. But I think it's also a deterrent, and we see less garbage in most places as a result. Transformation is inevitable. Will you lead it, get caught up in it, or follow it? What are the transformations in your life that should take place? Is it diet? Is it scaling back on your budget? Is it downsizing? Is it starting over? Is it hitting the reset button and refreshing your relationships? Is it adding new education? Is it about data? Is it about understanding with moral values and character qualities? What transformation needs to take place in your life? You have the chance now to lead to that transformation, to decide what that transformation will be, or to sit back and wait until it happens to you and not through you. I'm just saying, leadership is influence, nothing more and nothing less. The day that myself and Dr. Jeffrey Mitchell picked up trash for 15 minutes in the sweltering sun in the Congo, we made an impact on the leadership. We didn't set out with that goal, but it was the end result. And I believe it was a good one. Good on you, Dr. Mitchell. Good job. I'm J Loren Norris, and you've been watching Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.